The hardest slap I ever received was not from an enemy. It came from the only woman who had no idea who I was. Snow drifted beyond the towering stained-glass windows of Blackthorn Palace, while hundreds of nobles, merchants, generals, and visiting dignitaries gathered beneath glittering crystal chandeliers for the Winter Moon Ball, the most celebrated evening in the Northern Werewolf Kingdom. Music floated through the enormous ballroom as elegant couples glided across polished marble floors, every smile carefully practiced, every greeting measured, every ambition hidden beneath velvet gowns and tailored coats. Among them walked Emily Harper, a 23-year-old white Omega whose invitation had arrived only because she had delivered rare healing herbs to one of the royal physicians earlier that week. She did not belong to noble families, and she knew it. Her pale blue gown was beautifully simple beside the dazzling dresses surrounding her, but she carried herself with quiet dignity, refusing to pretend she was someone else. Emily had promised herself she would stay for one dance, congratulate the physician who had invited her, and leave before midnight. Balls were designed for politics, not ordinary people. She slipped toward the quieter edge of the ballroom, hoping to avoid unnecessary conversations, but the crowd suddenly shifted as another dance began. Couples stepped backward without warning. Laughter echoed through the hall. Someone brushed against her shoulder, causing her to stumble. Before she could regain her balance, a tall stranger stepped directly into her path. He neither bowed nor apologized. Instead, he remained perfectly still, studying her with calm silver-gray eyes that reflected the warm candlelight. Emily frowned. The stranger's silence felt almost arrogant. Around them, the music continued, but for a brief moment it seemed strangely distant. "Are you planning to let people pass?" she asked, trying to remain polite. The man answered only with the faintest smile, as though he had discovered something unexpectedly interesting. Emily mistook the expression for mockery. She had spent years watching wealthy guests smile politely before, looking down on people like her. She recognized that expression too well, or at least she believed she did. "Excuse me," she repeated firmly. Once again, he did not move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, almost curious, as though waiting to see what she would do next. Heat rushed into Emily's face. She refused to become another quiet target for someone's amusement. Before she could reconsider, her hand rose almost on instinct. A single sharp slap echoed across the marble ballroom. The music stopped. Conversations vanished. Crystal glasses froze halfway toward waiting lips. Hundreds of astonished eyes turned toward the unexpected sound. Emily's own heartbeat pounded louder than the silence surrounding her. The stranger slowly looked back at her, one hand resting calmly at his side. There was no anger in his face, no outrage, no demand for revenge, only quiet surprise mixed with something she could not understand. He gently touched his cheek for a brief second before lowering his hand again. Then, to everyone's complete confusion, he smiled. Not the proud smile of an insulted nobleman, not the cold smile of someone planning punishment. It was thoughtful, almost amused, as though the moment had answered a question only he had been asking. Without saying a single word, the mysterious man stepped aside, giving Emily more room than she had requested. Embarrassment flooded through her as whispers immediately spread across the ballroom like wind through winter branches. She lowered her eyes, murmured a quick apology that barely escaped her lips, and hurried toward the nearest exit before anyone could stop her. Behind her, the stranger quietly watched until the ballroom doors closed. Only after she disappeared into the snowy night did one royal attendant approach him with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty," the attendant whispered carefully, "shall I summon the royal guard?" Adrian Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Northern Kingdom, looked toward the closed doors with calm silver-gray eyes before answering with a gentle smile. "No," he said softly. "I believe I have finally met someone who sees a man before she sees a crown." Emily Harper barely slept after the Winter Moon Ball. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the silent stranger standing beneath the chandeliers, meeting her anger with unexpected calm instead of wounded pride. By sunrise, she had convinced herself that he had probably been some wealthy traveler or an unusually patient nobleman. And although the memory filled her with embarrassment, life did not pause simply because of one foolish moment. The small cottage she rented sat on the edge of Ashford Village, where towering pine trees shielded the winding roads from the cold northern wind. Before the first rays of sunlight reached the rooftops, Emily was already gathering fresh herbs from her drying racks, measuring roots with practiced hands, and preparing healing mixtures for the day's visitors. The familiar scent of lavender, sage, and mountain mint settled her restless thoughts. She reminded herself that ordinary people did not have the luxury of dwelling on yesterday's mistakes. An elderly farmer arrived shortly after breakfast, complaining about stiff joints after weeks of repairing fences before winter. Emily welcomed him with her usual gentle smile, brewed warm herbal tea, and carefully packed small cloth pouches filled with dried leaves that could be steeped each evening. When the old man reached into his pocket to pay, she quietly returned several silver coins to his weathered hand. "Save this for firewood," she said kindly. "The weather will grow colder before the week ends." The farmer tried to argue, but Emily simply smiled and wished him a safe walk home. She had always believed kindness returned in ways people rarely noticed. By late morning, the village market had become lively. Bakers carried fresh bread from glowing ovens. Children laughed while chasing one another across the square, and merchants called cheerful greetings to familiar faces. Emily arranged fresh herbs across her small wooden stall, carefully labeling each bundle so every customer would understand its purpose. She never exaggerated what her remedies could accomplish, and perhaps that honesty explained why so many villagers trusted her. Several customers thanked her for helping sick relatives recover through difficult winters, while others simply stopped to exchange friendly conversation. None of them knew she had become the subject of whispered rumors inside the royal palace only hours earlier. Far above the village, hidden beneath a dark traveling cloak instead of royal garments, Adrian Blackwood rode quietly through the forest toward Ashford Village. He had refused every suggestion from his advisors that the woman from the ball should be questioned or punished. Instead, curiosity had settled firmly in his mind. Throughout years of ruling the kingdom, nearly everyone had reacted to him with carefully rehearsed respect once they recognized his face. Emily had offered something entirely different. She had responded honestly, believing he was nothing more than an unfamiliar man blocking her path. For reasons he could not fully explain, that single moment felt more genuine than countless polished conversations inside the palace. Adrian left his horse at a nearby stable before entering the marketplace on foot. Hidden beneath simple clothing, he blended easily into the morning crowd. From a respectful distance, he watched Emily greet every customer with the same patience she had shown the elderly farmer. She laughed softly with children who admired the colorful flowers decorating her stall, accepted only fair payment, and quietly slipped extra herbs into the bags of families who clearly struggled to afford them. There was no audience to impress and no noble title to gain. Every act seemed effortless because kindness had become part of who she was. Adrian remained unnoticed as the afternoon sunlight warmed the stone streets. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King realized he was not observing a possible political ally or an ambitious noble seeking influence. He was watching an ordinary young woman whose character remained exactly the same whether anyone important was looking or not. And without realizing it, Emily had already begun changing the heart of the most powerful man in the kingdom. Over the next several days, winter settled gently across Ashford Village, covering rooftops with a thin blanket of fresh snow while crisp morning air carried the comforting scent of pine and burning firewood through every narrow street. Emily Harper welcomed each new sunrise with the same quiet routine that had shaped her life for years. She collected clean water from the village well before breakfast, gathered bundles of dried herbs from her cottage shelves, and prepared fresh remedies long before the marketplace awakened. Although the memory of the mysterious stranger at the winter moon ball still visited her from time to time, she gradually convinced herself that life was far too busy to spend worrying about someone she would almost certainly never meet again. Yet fate seemed determined to prove her wrong. Adrian Blackwood continued returning to the village wearing the simple clothing of an ordinary traveler. Without his royal coat, jeweled crest, or ceremonial guards, he blended naturally into the steady rhythm of village life. Each visit revealed another quiet truth about Emily that no royal report could ever capture. One afternoon, he watched as two young brothers arrived carrying a small basket filled with apples instead of coins. Their mother had become ill, and they hoped the fruit would be enough to purchase medicine. Emily accepted the apples with genuine gratitude, carefully prepared the herbs they needed, and secretly slipped several extra healing bundles into the basket before sending them home with encouraging smiles. She never mentioned that the medicine was worth far more than the apples. Another morning, Adrian noticed an exhausted stray dog curled beneath Emily's market table, trembling against the cold. While many shoppers hurried past without noticing, Emily quietly placed a warm blanket beside the animal and shared part of her own lunch before returning to greet customers. The little dog remained there all afternoon, peacefully sleeping beside her feet, as though it had already decided she was the safest person in the village. Adrian found himself smiling more often than he had in many months. He realized that Emily never seemed to calculate whether someone deserved kindness. She simply offered it because it reflected her own heart. That simple truth stayed with him long after each visit ended. Emily occasionally noticed the same dark-haired traveler wandering through the market. There was something familiar about him, although she could never explain why. Sometimes he purchased small packets of herbs he clearly did not need. Other times he paused beside neighboring stalls while quietly observing the cheerful conversations unfolding around her. Whenever their eyes briefly met, he responded with the same calm smile she remembered from the ballroom, and an uneasy feeling stirred inside her. She wondered whether she had seen him somewhere before, but the answer always slipped away before she could grasp it. Meanwhile, whispers from the royal capital slowly reached Ashford Village. Merchants passing through spoke about an unusual story spreading among the nobility. Someone claimed that an unidentified young woman had boldly struck an important guest during the winter moon ball before disappearing into the snowy night. Every storyteller offered a different version. Some insisted the mysterious guest had been a famous duke. Others claimed he had been a wealthy foreign ambassador. The rumors became more dramatic with every retelling, causing villagers to laugh at the unbelievable tale, while Emily quietly lowered her eyes and focused on arranging fresh lavender across her wooden display. She prayed no one would ever discover that she was the foolish young woman at the center of those growing stories. Standing unnoticed beneath the shade of an old oak tree at the edge of the marketplace, Adrian listened as the rumors drifted through the crowd like winter wind. He could have ended every false story with a single sentence, but he remained silent. The kingdom believed it understood power because it recognized crowns, titles, and grand ceremonies. Emily had unknowingly reminded him that genuine character revealed itself long before anyone learned another person's name. And with every passing day, the Alpha King became increasingly certain that destiny had not brought them together by accident. 1 week after the winter moon ball, invitations bearing the royal seal arrived across the northern kingdom announcing the midwinter royal banquet, a formal gathering where the Alpha King would recognize outstanding citizens whose work had strengthened the realm during the harsh season. Emily Harper nearly ignored the elegant envelope resting on her small kitchen table. She assumed it had been delivered by mistake until she unfolded the parchment and found her own name written in graceful handwriting beneath the royal crest. The chief royal physician had personally recommended her for providing healing herbs to remote villages throughout the year. She hesitated for a long time before accepting the invitation. Grand halls and noble gatherings had never felt like places where someone like her truly belonged. Still, declining an invitation from the palace would be considered disrespectful, so she carefully prepared her modest blue gown once again, hoping this evening would pass more quietly than the last. As the afternoon sun disappeared behind snow-covered mountains, elegant carriages rolled through the palace gates one after another. Noble families arrived dressed in magnificent fabrics, while musicians welcomed guests beneath glowing lanterns that lined the marble entrance. Emily stepped carefully into the enormous hall, trying to remain unnoticed among the crowd. The ballroom looked even more breathtaking than before, yet the memory of her embarrassing mistake lingered with every step she took across the polished floor. She silently prayed she would never encounter the mysterious stranger again. Unknown to her, Adrian Blackwood had watched her arrival from the upper gallery overlooking the grand hall. This evening he wore the full ceremonial attire of the Alpha King, including the dark royal coat embroidered with silver thread, the ancient crown of Blackwood resting above calm silver-gray eyes, and the crest that represented generations of rulers before him. Beside him stood trusted advisors discussing the order of the evening's ceremonies, but Adrian listened only with half his attention. His gaze repeatedly drifted toward the young herbalist quietly standing near one of the marble columns, politely greeting those who approached, yet making no attempt to attract notice. She looked exactly the same as she had in the village, humble despite standing among the kingdom's most powerful families. The banquet officially began as musicians performed a stately fanfare. One by one, honored guests were announced before stepping aside to await the arrival of the Alpha King. Emily remained near the back of the hall, relieved that no one seemed interested in speaking with her. Suddenly, the master of ceremonies raised his voice, and every conversation immediately faded into silence. Massive golden doors at the far end of the ballroom slowly opened. Royal guards entered first, followed by distinguished council members wearing ceremonial robes. Finally, Adrian Blackwood stepped through the entrance with calm confidence, and the entire hall bowed respectfully before their sovereign. Emily lifted her eyes only after everyone else had lowered theirs. The instant she saw his face, every sound around her seemed to disappear. The stranger from the winter moon ball, the traveler from the village marketplace, the quiet man who had smiled instead of becoming angry. They had all been the same person. Her heart seemed to stop as the truth settled over her like winter frost. Heat rushed into her face, while countless memories returned at once. She had spoken sharply to him. She had misunderstood him. She had even slapped him before hundreds of witnesses. Around the ballroom, whispers spread almost immediately as several nobles recognized the unmistakable expression of shock crossing Emily's face. A few guests quietly connected the rumors they had heard with the young woman, now standing frozen beneath the chandeliers. Emily lowered her eyes, wishing the polished marble floor might somehow swallow her whole. Yet when Adrian's gaze finally met hers across the magnificent hall, there was still no anger within his calm silver-gray eyes. Instead, there remained the same quiet smile that had followed her ever since the night their destinies unexpectedly crossed. Emily Harper could barely breathe as the truth settled over the grand ballroom. Every graceful bow, every whispered greeting, every royal banner surrounding her suddenly carried a weight she had never imagined. The quiet stranger she had misunderstood was not an ordinary traveler. He was Adrian Blackwood, the Alpha King whose name every child in the kingdom learned before they could read. Embarrassment washed over her so completely that she instinctively lowered her eyes, hoping no one would notice the color rising in her cheeks. Around the magnificent hall, however, the silence had already begun to transform into cautious whispers. Noble families exchanged uncertain glances while council members quietly observed the unexpected tension unfolding before them. Several guests recognized Emily from the winter moon ball, and the old rumor that had spread through the capital finally found its missing pieces. The master of ceremonies waited respectfully for the Alpha King to begin the evening's address, but Adrian remained still for a brief moment, his calm silver-gray eyes never leaving the young herbalist standing near the marble column. Then, instead of speaking from the elevated royal platform as tradition required, he stepped down the wide staircase one measured step at a time. Confused murmurs rippled across the ballroom. Kings rarely left the ceremonial platform before official proceedings had concluded. Emily instinctively took half a step backward, convinced she was about to receive the consequences of her mistake before the entire kingdom. Instead, Adrian stopped a respectful distance in front of her. His expression remained peaceful, almost reassuring. "Miss Harper," he said in a calm voice that carried naturally through the silent hall, "please look at me." With trembling hands folded together, Emily slowly raised her eyes. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "I owe you an apology that words cannot fully express. I judged you without understanding who you were. I acted without patience, and I deeply regret my behavior." Adrian listened without interruption before a gentle smile returned to his face. "You are apologizing because you believe I am your king," he answered quietly. "Tell me honestly, if I had truly been nothing more than an ordinary stranger behaving with poor manners, would you still believe you had defended yourself correctly?" Emily hesitated. Every noble in the room waited for her answer. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. I would still believe that respect should exist between strangers. I only wish I had paused long enough to understand the situation before reacting." Adrian's smile widened almost imperceptibly. Then your honesty remains unchanged. He turned toward the assembled nobles, whose expressions reflected equal measures of confusion and curiosity. Many people spend years inside this palace speaking carefully because they recognize my crown, he continued. Miss Harper spoke honestly because she did not. The ballroom fell completely silent once again. Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne, one of the kingdom's most influential council members, frowned slightly before stepping forward. Your Majesty, he said respectfully. Surely such behavior toward the throne cannot simply be overlooked. Adrian calmly faced the councilman. Respect earned through fear disappears the moment fear is removed, he replied. Respect offered freely reveals the true character of the person giving it. His words echoed softly beneath the towering ceiling. Then, to the astonishment of every guest present, Adrian extended his hand toward Emily, not as a command, but as an invitation. She looked at him with disbelief before carefully placing her hand in his. The gesture lasted only a moment, yet it transformed the atmosphere inside the entire ballroom. The kingdom invited Miss Harper here tonight because she has quietly improved the lives of countless families, Adrian announced. That achievement deserves recognition far more than one unfortunate misunderstanding. Warm applause began hesitantly from the royal physician who had recommended Emily, followed by several village representatives who knew her kindness firsthand. One after another, more guests joined until the great hall filled with sincere applause instead of whispered judgment. Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from shame this time, but from overwhelming relief. Across the ballroom, however, Lord Nathaniel remained silent, watching both of them with thoughtful concern. He sensed that the Alpha King's unexpected decision had changed far more than the outcome of one embarrassing evening. It had quietly begun reshaping the future of the entire kingdom. The applause gradually faded, yet its echoes seemed to linger inside the towering walls of Blackthorn Palace long after the final pair of hands became still. Emily Harper stood quietly beside the royal physician, wishing she could disappear into the crowd before anyone asked another question. Instead, curious glances followed her across the ballroom. Some reflected admiration, while others carried uncertainty. For generations, the Northern Kingdom had believed that every important decision began with noble blood and ended with noble approval. Tonight, that belief had quietly shifted, and many guests did not know how to respond. Adrian Blackwood returned to the royal platform with the same calm confidence he had carried throughout the evening. His expression revealed neither triumph nor defiance. Instead, he appeared thoughtful, as though he fully understood that changing hearts required far more patience than winning arguments. The formal banquet continued. Musicians resumed their elegant melodies, and servants carried beautifully prepared meals through the hall, but conversation no longer centered on trade agreements or winter harvests. Every whispered discussion eventually returned to the same young herbalist whose honesty had unexpectedly captured the attention of the Alpha King. Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne remained silent for much of the evening before finally approaching Adrian after the official ceremonies had concluded. Away from the larger crowd, the respected councilman lowered his voice. Your Majesty, he began carefully, I do not question your judgment. I question the consequences that may follow it. The nobles will believe that tradition is being replaced by emotion. Adrian looked toward the ballroom, where Emily politely thanked the royal physician before preparing to leave. Tradition exists to protect what is valuable, he answered calmly. When tradition begins protecting pride instead of people, it loses its purpose. Nathaniel folded his hands thoughtfully. Some members of the royal council will not accept that answer. Adrian nodded without hesitation. Then they deserve the opportunity to ask their questions openly. The councilman studied the king's composed expression before giving a respectful bow. He recognized the quiet determination behind those silver-gray eyes. Adrian had already made his decision, not from impulse, but from careful observation built over many days. Meanwhile, Emily stepped outside the palace into the crisp winter evening, grateful for the cold air that finally allowed her breathing to slow. Snowflakes drifted gently beneath the lanterns lining the palace courtyard as elegant carriages carried guests back toward the capital. She had expected humiliation, perhaps even punishment. Instead, She had received unexpected understanding from the one person she had feared disappointing the most. The experience left her heart filled with gratitude, but also confusion. Why had the Alpha King shown her such remarkable patience? She had done nothing extraordinary. She had simply lived according to the values her late parents had taught her since childhood. As she reached the palace gates, a familiar voice called gently behind her. "Miss Harper." Emily turned to find Adrian walking toward her without ceremonial guards or formal announcement. In the quiet courtyard, he looked less like a distant ruler and more like the thoughtful traveler she had unknowingly met several times before. She immediately bowed respectfully. Adrian offered a warm smile. "There is no need to apologize again," he said softly. "You have already spoken honestly, and honesty rarely requires repeating." Emily looked up with quiet uncertainty. "Your Majesty, I still struggle to understand why you chose kindness when every reason existed to be offended." Adrian glanced toward the snow-covered gardens surrounding the palace before answering. "Because during every visit to your village, I saw the same person. You helped strangers who could offer nothing in return. You treated every customer with equal respect. You remained generous when no one important was watching. A single mistake cannot erase a lifetime of character." Emily felt her eyes fill with emotion once more. No compliment had ever carried such weight because it came from someone who had witnessed her ordinary life instead of a carefully prepared performance. Adrian continued gently. "The kingdom needs more people who value character above appearance. That is why I hope this is not our final conversation." Before Emily could respond, the palace bells softly announced the late evening hour. Adrian gave a respectful nod and stepped back, allowing her to choose her own path without pressure or expectation. As Emily walked through the palace gates beneath the quiet snowfall, she carried home something far more valuable than royal recognition. For the first time in many years, she believed that perhaps the distance between an ordinary heart and a royal crown was not measured by status at all, but by the courage to remain genuine no matter who happened to be watching. The morning after the royal banquet, fresh snow shimmered beneath a pale winter sun as Ashford Village slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. Yet Emily Harper quickly realized that something inside her own life had quietly changed forever. People still greeted her with the same warmth they always had, but now there was a new layer of curiosity behind their smiles. Travelers passing through the marketplace whispered respectfully as they recognized the young herbalist, whose name had unexpectedly reached the royal palace. Emily accepted every greeting with quiet humility, determined that no amount of attention would alter the simple life she loved. She arranged herbs across her familiar wooden stall, brewed warm tea for elderly neighbors, and carefully prepared remedies for children fighting winter colds exactly as she had done countless mornings before. If anything, she worked even harder, hoping her actions would speak louder than the stories spreading across the kingdom. High above the village inside Blackthorn Palace, Adrian Blackwood spent the early hours inside the royal archives, surrounded by towering shelves filled with centuries of carefully preserved records. The conversation with Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne had remained in his thoughts throughout the night. If the royal council questioned his judgment, then every answer must rest upon truth rather than personal feeling. While reviewing old village records with the kingdom's elderly royal historian, Adrian noticed a faded document describing a healer's family that had once served the crown generations earlier. The family crest sketched beside the handwritten notes immediately caught his attention. It resembled a small silver pendant he vaguely remembered seeing around Emily's neck whenever she leaned forward to prepare herbs at her market stall. Curious rather than convinced, Adrian asked the historian to continue searching through older collections that few people had opened for decades. Dust drifted gently through narrow beams of sunlight as fragile parchment after fragile parchment revealed fragments of forgotten history. Meanwhile, Emily returned home shortly before sunset carrying unsold herbs in a woven basket. As she organized supplies inside her cottage, an old cedar chest tucked beneath her parents' bed caught her attention. She had not opened it since their passing years earlier because every object inside carried precious memories. Something urged her to look again. Carefully lifting the weathered lid, she found neatly folded blankets, handwritten recipes, family letters, and a small wooden box wrapped in faded blue cloth. Inside rested the silver pendant she had occasionally worn as a child before storing it away for safekeeping. She gently brushed away the dust and studied the delicate engraving beneath the fading firelight. A crescent moon embraced by intertwining branches surrounded a tiny star carved into polished silver. She smiled softly, remembering how her mother had once called it a family keepsake that should never be sold, even during difficult times. Beyond that simple instruction, no explanation had ever been given. Emily slipped the pendant around her neck, thinking only that it allowed her parents to feel a little closer. At nearly the same moment, inside the royal archives, the elderly historian carefully unfolded one final parchment that had remained sealed with hardened wax for many years. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he compared the faded royal sketch with the drawing Adrian had recreated from memory. After several quiet moments, the old scholar looked up with unmistakable surprise. "Your Majesty," he said gently, "this emblem belonged to the House of Everley, a family of healers who once protected members of the royal bloodline during the Great Winter Sickness many generations ago. They refused titles, wealth, and noble rank, choosing instead to remain among ordinary people. Before the last surviving records disappeared, the crown promised that their loyalty would never be forgotten." Adrian remained silent as countless pieces slowly began fitting together. He had admired Emily because of her character long before learning anything about her family. Yet now destiny seemed to be revealing another layer neither of them had expected. Far below the palace walls, Emily stepped outside her cottage beneath a sky filled with brilliant winter stars, completely unaware that the small silver pendant resting above her heart had quietly reopened a chapter of history capable of changing not only her own future, but perhaps the future of the entire Northern Kingdom. 3 days later, a formal invitation bearing the royal seal arrived once again at Emily Harper's cottage, but this message carried a very different purpose. The royal council requested her presence at Blackthorn Palace, where several council members wished to learn more about the healer whose name had unexpectedly become part of every important conversation in the kingdom. Emily read the letter twice before quietly folding it back into its envelope. She understood that this gathering would not resemble the warmth she had experienced during the royal banquet. It would be a test, not of her knowledge alone, but of her character. Early the following morning she traveled through snow-covered forests toward the capital, wearing the same modest blue cloak she had always worn during winter journeys. Around her neck rested the small silver pendant she had rediscovered inside her family's cedar chest, not as decoration, but as a quiet reminder of the parents who had taught her that honesty never required expensive clothing or impressive titles. Inside the great council chamber, towering windows allowed pale winter sunlight to spill across polished stone floors. The Alpha King occupied his place at the head of the long table, while respected council members gathered on either side. Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne welcomed Emily with courteous formality before inviting her to stand in the center of the chamber. Although dozens of thoughtful eyes rested upon her, she remained calm, taking a slow breath before offering a respectful bow. The questioning began gently. Several council members asked about her herbal knowledge, the villages she served, and the remedies she prepared during difficult winters. Emily answered every question with quiet confidence, never pretending to know more than she truly did. When she lacked certainty, she admitted it honestly instead of offering impressive-sounding guesses. Her sincerity gradually softened even the most skeptical expressions around the table. Finally, Lord Nathaniel spoke. "Miss Harper, many people believe the Alpha King has shown unusual favor toward you. If that attention were suddenly taken away tomorrow, would your life change?" Emily considered the question carefully before lifting her eyes. "My gratitude would never change," she replied softly. "But neither would my purpose. Tomorrow morning, I would still gather herbs before sunrise. I would still care for children with fevers and elderly neighbors who cannot afford medicine. A person's purpose should not depend upon who happens to notice it." Quiet silence settled across the chamber. Adrian watched her answer without interruption, recognizing the same unwavering honesty that had first captured his attention. The elderly royal historian then stepped forward carrying the faded parchment discovered inside the archives. Beside it rested a careful drawing of the silver pendant Emily now wore. "Miss Harper," he asked gently, "may we see the keepsake around your neck?" Emily removed the pendant and respectfully placed it into his waiting hands. The historian compared both images before smiling with unmistakable certainty. "There is no doubt," he announced. "This is the authentic crest of the House of Everly." Curious whispers filled the chamber as the old scholar explained how generations earlier the Everly healers had protected the royal family during the kingdom's darkest winter without asking for wealth or noble rank. In return, the crown had sworn that their devotion would always be honored should their descendants ever be found again. Emily listened in stunned silence. She had believed the pendant carried only personal memories of her parents. She had never imagined it represented a forgotten promise woven into the kingdom's history. Lord Nathaniel slowly rose from his chair and looked toward Adrian before returning his gaze to Emily. "It appears," he said with quiet respect, "that your family earned the gratitude of this kingdom long before any of us were born. Yet what impresses this council most is not your heritage. It is that you honored your family's values without ever expecting recognition." Around the chamber, one by one, council members nodded in agreement. Emily had not persuaded them through noble birth, wealth, or influence. She had earned their respect through the same quiet kindness she practiced every ordinary day, proving that genuine character remained the strongest legacy any family could ever leave behind. Winter slowly gave way to the first gentle signs of spring, and with the changing season came a quiet transformation that reached every corner of the northern kingdom. Snow melted from the hills surrounding Ashford Village. Narrow streams began flowing once more, and the marketplace filled with fresh colors as flowers pushed through the softened earth. Emily Harper welcomed each morning exactly as she always had, carrying baskets of herbs through familiar streets and greeting neighbors by name. Although her life had become known far beyond the village, she refused every unnecessary luxury offered by grateful nobles and visiting merchants. She believed kindness lost its meaning the moment it became a performance. That simple conviction only deepened the respect people held for her. Inside Blackthorn Palace, Adrian Blackwood watched those changes with quiet satisfaction. Reports from village leaders, merchants, and royal officials all carried the same message. Since the midwinter royal banquet, more noble families had begun supporting rural clinics, donating supplies to isolated communities, and treating common citizens with greater respect. No royal decree had demanded those changes. They had grown naturally from one unforgettable example that reminded the kingdom what true leadership looked like. One clear afternoon, Adrian invited Emily to walk through the Royal Botanical Gardens, where rare medicinal plants had been carefully cultivated for generations. There were no grand ceremonies waiting for them, no musicians, and no crowded audience. Only birds singing among blooming trees and the peaceful sound of flowing water surrounded their quiet conversation. As they walked along the stone path, Emily smiled while identifying herbs she had only read about in old medical journals. Adrian listened with genuine interest, appreciating the excitement in her voice whenever she spoke about healing rather than recognition. After a comfortable silence, he finally stopped beside a flowering cherry tree whose pale blossoms drifted gently through the warm breeze. "There is something I have wanted to tell you since the night we first met," Adrian said softly. Emily looked at him with quiet curiosity. "At the Winter Moon Ball, everyone around me saw the Alpha King. You were the only person who responded to the man standing in front of you. Even though the moment began with misunderstanding, it became the first honest conversation I had experienced in a very long time." Emily laughed gently, warmth returning to her eyes. "I never imagined that one impulsive mistake would lead me here." Adrian smiled. "Neither did I. Yet sometimes destiny arrives in ways that no careful plan could ever create." He reached into the pocket of his royal coat and carefully removed the restored silver pendant belonging to the House of Everly. The royal craftsman had strengthened its worn chain while preserving every original detail. Holding it respectfully, Adrian placed it into Emily's hands. "Your family once served this kingdom through compassion instead of ambition," he said. "You have continued that legacy without even knowing it. I hope you will continue walking beside this kingdom's future, not because of ancient promises, but because your heart has already earned its place." Emily looked down at the pendant before meeting his calm silver-gray eyes. She saw no command within them, only sincere respect and quiet hope. Then I will continue serving exactly as I always have, she answered with a peaceful smile. Only now, I know I will not be walking alone. Adrian nodded, and together they continued along the garden path as blossoms floated gently around them. Months later, people across the northern kingdom still shared the remarkable story of the young herbalist who had once mistaken the Alpha King for an ordinary stranger. Some remembered the unexpected slap that had begun everything, while others remembered the royal banquet where forgiveness triumphed over pride. But those who truly understood the story always reached the same conclusion. A crown could reveal authority, and a family name could preserve history, yet neither could measure the true worth of a person. Only compassion freely given, honesty quietly lived, and courage shown without expectation possessed that kind of lasting power. And in the years that followed, whenever children asked how an ordinary young woman had earned the trust of an Alpha King, their parents smiled and answered with the simplest truth of all. She treated him with the same humanity she offered everyone else, long before she ever knew he wore a crown. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite moment, and what message or lesson did you take away from Emily and Adrian's journey? Share your opinion in the comments below and join the conversation with fellow story lovers. If you enjoyed this tale, please give the video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Alpha's Regret Stories. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next exciting story filled with romance, drama, betrayal, and unforgettable twists. See you in the next story.